seems like most of the people we had have migrated here. Uh, I apologize to everybody for our delay. I assume it was all my fault somehow. I'm not sure exactly how, but easy to be easy to take. Hi, Mavis. Good morning.
Hi, good
All right.
morning.
So, Alex, I already told everybody who you were, and they already knew because they're all friends of yours and they have worked with you or whatever in the past. And we are behind. So, why don't we just get started? And you know that we appreciate you doing this for us.
I don't even know how I got in this meeting. Yeah.
I think our first session, Alex, if I remember correctly, was on November 14th. Um,
Yep, I think that's right. I think we had a November session, a March session, and then sort of paused. And so this will be our final meeting. But I'm happy to kick us off. So for those of you that I don't know, my name is Alex Staropoli. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the founder and principal of Staropoli Strategies. I've spent my career in the public policy space doing advocacy on the federal, state, and local levels. And I'm happy to be here with you all today. So I will share my screen. And for those of you who weren't on initially, I'm going to stay off camera because my internet's unstable. So I apologize that you're just looking at my picture, but want to be able to not lose connection. So I am going to start us off with an overview for folks who weren't on the first couple of calls. I'm going to do a summary of those calls. Let me share my screen. Are you all seeing that?
we are.
Okay, great. So today we'll go through the goal and purpose. For those who are joining for the first time, I'll go through a recap of the meetings and then we'll spend some time in discussion. So as many of you probably know, in March of 2024, the Nonprofit Development Center of Southern New Jersey convened stakeholders on different issues, or they had the summit and then after that are convening stakeholders on the different issues that came up during the summit. Housing was a top issue at the summit. And sorry, this is the third meeting. I didn't update this slide. And then there's going to be another summit. Mike, I know Michelle told me the date, but I'm forgetting when that's going to be.
It's in March of 2026, and I forget the exact date. I'll look it up while you're talking. I think
Okay,
March
great.
17th, but I'll double check.
Yeah, that sounds right, I think. And so the goal is really there's these series of conversations on top issues and to ultimately come up with a set of recommendations that are actionable and that can sort of help impact the issues that are identified in South Jersey. So during meetings 1 and 2, we spent some time laying the groundwork about housing in the state and in Southern New Jersey more specifically. We talked a little bit about the continuum of housing, different issues. And these are the big barriers that were identified. So affordability was at the top of the list. People not being able to afford rent or being able to purchase homes. We talked about the lack of counsel in landlord and tenant proceedings. We talked about barriers to building affordable housing, specifically in flood zones came up and sort of the restrictions on building in specific places. We talked about the expiration of deed restrictions. So some of you might know that when affordable housing is built, there are controls that allow for housing to remain affordable for a period of time. So those can be 20 years up to 30 years. And when those deed restrictions expire, that housing turns over to market rate. And so New Jersey already has a deficit of affordable housing upwards of 200,000 units. And then we're really at risk of adding to that deficit because a lot of affordable housing is reaching the point of affordability controls expiring. We talked a little bit about the cumbersome processes to acquire vacant property. So even in places where there's an interest to acquire vacant property and rehab it and then turn it into affordable housing or market rate housing, trying to get clear title to that property, even in places where there are programs to do so, can be really difficult. We talked about a couple of the legal challenges in the housing court space. So particularly having to post funds with the court to avoid eviction. So having to pay your back rent before you can take over the property again. And so people not being able to do that. And so then they lose the property. And then also being able to mount a habitability defense requires you to post funds with the court as well, before you can even raise the defense. And so that being a barrier to people being successful or being able to challenge habitability issues within their home. We talked about supportive housing often not providing enough supports. And so I think this is sort of a dual issue, both that there isn't enough supportive housing, and then for certain populations, the supportive housing that does exist isn't actually providing enough supports for people. If everybody can just make sure they're muted, I don't want to mute anybody because then you won't be able to unmute yourself. If people, so we talked about this sort of paradox of people that are on disability or other social supports that require them to have certain income levels. And if they start to save money or, if they start to work and make money, they will lose their disability and other benefits. And so it's sort of this handcuffs and keeping people in poverty, because if they make over a certain amount of money, then they'll lose those benefits. We talked about the challenge of transitioning people from affordable housing to market rate housing. So if you're living in affordable housing, how do you ultimately save and are able to move into market rate housing? And then sort of this looming, which I'm sure we're all dealing with, federal cuts and how they will impact who is eligible for a variety of programs. And so I think this is both a eligibility question. Will eligibility requirements change? And then what are the resources that are going to be available across the board? And I think there's still a lot of unknowns on how this is going to play out across the board. Some of the special populations that were identified in the first two conversations, we talked about veterans as being a population that is often impacted and falls within the unhoused or homeless population. We talked about individuals with developmental and physical disabilities, survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. We talked a little bit about individuals with substance use disorders being a special population with particular needs, particularly as they are leaving treatment. And similarly, individuals with mental health needs and sort of the variety of challenges that they can face in a housing context. And then we talked about young adults aging out of transitional housing as another unique population with specific needs. And so some of the solutions that came up during our first conversations, and you'll see these largely map onto the barriers. So some of these we explicitly talked about, some of them I also pulled based on the barriers we talked about. So one of the big ones in response to sort of this affordability issue, particularly with rents, is really the acknowledgement that New Jersey needs a statewide rent control law. And then there's obviously also options for rent control to happen on the local level. So you'll see some of these are in local, some of them are in state, but there is some overlap there. Expanding access to counsel in landlord-tenant proceedings. And so what I'll say on this is during COVID, we saw an expansion and an influx of funding to provide counsel. in housing cases, particularly with the use of some of the federal funding that came to the state. As that funding has now ran out, there's the um, chance that that these programs that have existed will lose funding and not be able to continue to exist, and even the work that they're doing now, right? Like they could be doing a lot more if there was an actual right to counsel in these cases, or just additional funding to be able to serve more people. One of the solutions to the challenges to build affordable housing would to be change state and local zoning to allow for housing to be built in more areas. We could also extend the affordability controls where units are coming offline, so extending those deed restrictions that I mentioned earlier. We could streamline processes to make it easier to acquire vacant property. So again, you could do that on the local and or state level. We could expand supportive housing programs. This could be both expanding to serve more people or expanding the services that are actually provided within the programs that exist. And then one of the things that came up as a potential pilot or solution to some of the challenges that we identified was to develop training and education programs to support people as tenants and homeowners. So again, if everyone can just mute themselves, this idea that some people need help to like be a good tenant, to figure out like, how do I create a budget? How do I make sure I pay my rent on time? How do I put aside some money if I do need to repair something and I'm a new homeowner? So thinking about what are the types of training and education programs, and then again, how to transition from affordable housing to market rate housing, and really thinking about helping people build generational wealth by being able to purchase homes as well. And then on the state level, these first two bullets are around the eviction proceedings and the habitability defense, and really changing the rules that govern the posting of back rent and the posting requirement to raise the habitability defense. And then this last bullet, I think, is sort of a state and a federal. I think this is a really challenging one, but sort of evaluating disability and other programs that are meant to help people, but really create this cycle of poverty for folks who aren't able to escape that because of the income thresholds and requirements there. So these are some of the things that came up. I'd really like to spend today, either, for folks who want to react to these solutions, if people have additional things, we're really looking for ideas of, in the South Jersey region, based on what you all are seeing as the biggest issues in housing. What could we do? If there's one thing you could do to impact the current situation in South Jersey, what would it be? Are there pilot programs that we could implement and use that as proof of concept to then scale it? So thinking about those things, and I can put this list back up, but really want to open it up to you all. These are some of the things that have been discussed already. But yeah, what are your reactions to this? What are your thoughts? What's missing? So I'll turn it over to you. And feel free to raise your hand if you want, or come off mute.
Maybe Alex, we could phrase some of the comments, some of the feedback in a slightly different way, although I hate to adopt the negative. Is there anything on this list that you all consider so speculative or so controversial, even though you might support it, that it doesn't fall into the category of the kinds of things that NPDC, SNJ, and the nonprofits that it has been created to help would want to support. We're looking for, we know that in every area we look at, and as I said at the outset, there are 17 different subject matter areas that we're pursuing in the same way that Alex is helping us pursue housing. We're looking for the list of possible solutions, and Alex has given you a very detailed rendition of what was discussed in our first two meetings. The question is, if NPDCSNJ wants to have an agenda that is manageable and points toward our goal of having the most NPO-friendly region in the country by 2030, what are the one or two or three things in the field of housing, particularly if they overlap? Obviously, we talked about the impact on veterans, the impact on people who have substance use concerns, mental health. We have separate discussions on all those issues. So these are all bridge issues. But if there are some things that you say, gosh, I might support that or I might not, but it'll never work. It would require state legislative action, and I just feel it would be a valuable discussion, but the chances of it happening are so modest that it would not end up on our short list of things to do. So if in your experience you see things that might fall into that category, good for us who are less sophisticated than you in terms of all this discussion to know that they are sufficiently speculative or controversial that they probably don't belong on our short-term agenda. Everything gets on the long-term agenda, everything we agree on. But what are the half dozen things that we as an organization want to devote our time to advocating on behalf of?
Yeah, and Mike, just to add to that, there are things on this list, right? So like, I think any of the state legislative changes are really difficult to do. And I think anything that requires significant investments from the state, right, that would be a budgetary line item, are really difficult also. And so, right, I know that there are things on this list that fall into that categories, and so would love to hear from you all. And then the other thing I'll say too is that at the end of this call, um, I'm also going to send out like a Google survey to the full list of folks who participated in these different meetings to ask them questions about these two, to provide feedback. But again, would love to hear from you all now, um, on what you're thinking. Ashley, go ahead.
Thanks, Alex. So I think probably one of the biggest uphill battles is going to be statewide rent control. So there's only a couple of states in the nation that already have statewide rent control, and that's relatively new. I think it was 2019 when Oregon passed it. So we also have like a really strong landlord lobby in New Jersey, the Apartment Owners Association. So I think that statewide rent control is going to be a big lift for us. I did also want to add kind of like one overarching theme that I think is really important. And that is the disparity in funding and resources between North and South Jersey. So for example, with our program, we're part of this New Jersey Statewide Housing Justice Program that's housed at both Newark and Seton Hall and Rutgers Camden. Both of the Newark locations, so Seton Hall and Rutgers Newark, were funded this year, but our Camden location wasn't. And I know that there are differences in funding for all types of different, supports and legal services throughout the state. So raising that north-south divide and disparities in funding, I think, is really important when you guys consider advocacy going forward.
That's a great point. One of the suggestions has been that if there are a number of issues that would be discussable, should be discussed at the state level, that we try to have an NPDCSNJ day in Trenton, where we would invite our legislative delegations to come and talk to us about the things that we thought were important. And we know that they would show up, because if they don't show up, they get labeled as, not caring and whatever. But something like that, I mean, that's a long-standing you know, the whole north-south divide and the disparity in funding and all of that. And, you know, it was less of a problem when the Speaker of the House was Speaker of the Assembly was from South Jersey, and the majority leader of the Assembly was from South Jersey, and so on. But that's a great point, Ashley. And just unrelated to that, I was looking at the last thing on your local list, Alex. And if we had a pilot program where we did create an education, training, whatever support system for tenants and homeowners in one defined geographic location, and we could show that after a certain period of time there were results that seemed to justify the effort, that is something that certainly would be scalable and something that would be new, and something that I think that would fall within the purview of any number of the not-for-profits that we represent. So anyway, back to you, Alex.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's a range of things here, right? So we're talking about program design and development potentially, right? There's also local rule changes in some ways, and then there's state level statutory and regulatory changes potentially, right? So all of those you know, are change on different levels. Obviously the things that are programmatic, that don't involve large funding requirements are a little bit easier, right? Or lower hanging fruit than the ones that require you know, a legislative process or a rulemaking process.
Come on,
Any
guys.
other reflections on this list or
No.
things that are missing?
Yeah,
Or
let's
even
be,
if there's issues that you all are facing that aren't represented in any of these solutions.
Well,
I have two thoughts if you can hear me. Oh, sorry. Did I
I
talk
was
over?
going to say, like, I am a housing attorney with SJLS. The biggest problem is money. Like, people cannot afford to pay rent, and 80%, 90% of evictions are non-payment of rent evictions. And without the funding, I don't see any of these other solutions really doing much. I think we should try to get more state rental assistance vouchers, more SRAP vouchers, because I don't see them coming from the federal. I don't see HUD issuing a lot of vouchers in the future. But even with training programs, people just do not have enough money, so they're not going to be able to pay rent. I mean, someone was saying before rents are like 2,200. We see people paying 3,000 a month for rent. It's really not doable without some kind of rental subsidy. And that, to me, is the most important thing, is to try to figure out a way to get more subsidies for people to pay their rent.
so Maria, if we suppose that, I don't know, this is the real world kind of thing, but suppose there were a program for a certain population, whether it was defined geographically or otherwise, to get a higher level of assistance. I don't even know whether that would be unfair on its face because it would be inequitable, but what would we be looking at? What
I'm not
Wait,
sure what you're asking,
talk
but
out for. Okay.
what I would
I can
say,
answer like super basic questions about
I
wills.
think
Like, yep, this one
somebody,
looks legit, or like,
Kaya,
Um,
I think you're
but
unmuted.
that's really like where my knowledge ends.
yeah.
But
So
yeah, anyone needs help preparing will, or
there is the state SRAP program right now. So basically, the state of New Jersey tried to expand the HUD vouchers and just make a state program for that. And I know that we, through DCA, there's a Office of Eviction Prevention, and they have been fully funded. So they're supposed to distribute money through these different agencies to help with non-payment of rent. It would help if that would be a pressure point to try to get them to get more SRAP vouchers out into the public to help with the rent. Because these vouchers can come from different agencies. They can come from DCP&P, they can come from DDD, they can come from different drug and alcohol treatment programs that they're issued a certain number of vouchers to give to their clients. So it's helping those populations. There's also specific vouchers for veterans. There's BASH. And some veterans that go through programs, at the end of that time, they get a voucher. So those are the kinds of populations that would be helped by these vouchers, or domestic violence survivors. But there's also just your regular people that are like a single mom that's working a job that can't afford to pay rent. I mean, that person may not fall into any of these categories, but they still need help with a subsidy.
Alex, can I throw in an outlier, which is I recently had a discussion with some people who are certainly more knowledgeable than I am. That applies to every issue, but we were talking about UBIs and what the various research, both across the world and in this country, has shown as to the impact, the viability. Do they work? Is there any feeling among the folks on this call about whether a universal basic income, forget what amount, but is that a concept that belongs in this discussion?
So I was, so there's definitely been on the state level, right? Like UBI has been thrown out in the advocacy world for the last few years. I think the right, it's a political challenge of like whether New Jersey would ever pass a universal basic income. I think as a policy concept, right, there's a lot of value, and there's demonstrable evidence, right, that like UBI programs help. I think I mean, it falls in some ways, right, in the same category as vouchers and other financial assistance, with obviously less strings attached, right? And so, um, yeah, I think it's another one that I think is cross sector, right, Mike? Like as you think about the variety of issues, one that helps with all of the issues, right? If people just have money, to Maria's point, to pay for the things that the basic necessities that they need to pay for, that puts them in a better place.
One thing I wanted to raise about UBI is that we always have to consider too, like for every dollar received through some other source, where the dollars are going for other fund, if, for example, they have TANF, or if they have some sort of other subsidy or any sort of other support, we have to make sure that the UBI wouldn't count against that. And so when you're talking about, for example, federal sources of income like Social Security, and then you're adding a state UBI, there may be some interplay there that we don't anticipate, or that we could anticipate but didn't fully think through, that then disqualifies people for other forms of income. I did also want to raise one other thing that wasn't in play the last time we had a meeting, I don't think, which is now the decreased funding for the childcare subsidy in New Jersey. So they're not accepting new applications for the state daycare subsidy. And that was one of the ways that we often freed up income for a lot of our clients to be able to pay the rent, was if they weren't receiving daycare subsidy and they were paying out of pocket and they really couldn't afford it. It was an easy way to get them on the voucher and have them meet their expenses otherwise. But now they're not accepting any new applications because there's a lack of funding. So it's just like, losing funds from one place to move over to another. And then, yeah, folks are having difficulty paying rent because of that.
Alex,
Thanks, Al.
one thing, this is just a total tangent, a procedural tangent, but listening to people like Ashley and Maria who are so immersed in this, the whole vocabulary, all the alphabet agency references, they mean nothing to me. And so as we come out of this and as we start to talk about things that we are supporting, things that we want people to consider, things that we are actually advocating for, to be able to do it in a way that doesn't put people like me at a disadvantage, because we're referring to this program. I have no idea what those, what those letters mean. And just a thought for those of us who are, as I said before, less sophisticated with respect to this panoply of issues around housing.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Mike, and Ira, before we go to you, Matt, were you trying to say something before when Maria was speaking? Okay, if you want to, feel free to raise your hand and I'll put you in the queue. Mike, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, hello everybody. So I'm Mike. I work at Heart of Camden, which is a nonprofit community development corporation in Camden, New Jersey. And so my context for this conversation is, what we do is we build affordable housing, specifically for homeownership units. So we've done 250 plus in the previous several decades. So our context is building affordable housing for home ownership using affordable housing trust fund money typically, or NRTC or other funding sources. So for our context, which is common in Camden with other CDCs and other cities as well, I'm sure. As mentioned on here, acquisition is always a huge barrier. So, tax foreclosure is effective, but takes a long time. There's tools that municipalities could use that they don't always use, like Abandoned Properties Act, which could, streamline acquiring vacant properties, but doesn't always get utilized. So acquisition is always a key barrier. In terms of what's on the list under the local bullet point, extending affordability controls where units are coming offline. My personal recommendation is to extend affordability controls on rental units, but not homeownership units. Reason being, I believe that even when people are buying homeownership units through affordability controls, that they still deserve to build equity over time. So, whether that affordability control is 15 years or 30 years, depending on the funding source, my understanding is that municipalities can still choose to extend that affordability. So imagine if you're a homeowner, you think that you're gonna gain full equity in your house after 15 or 30 years, and then you get there, and then the municipality says, actually, we're gonna extend it. That's pretty not just demoralizing, but it means that you're not building equity. And kind of like it was pointed out how, if you're receiving public subsidy, but you save too much, then it's like, well, now you're ineligible. And so it kind of perpetuates poverty in that way. And similarly, um, if you aren't able to get that equity from that property after the affordability control, you got affordable housing for that period, yes, but it didn't really build that generational wealth. So I just wanted to bring up that point.
Yeah,
And the
Mike,
last,
thanks for that. I agree with you. I will clarify that in this so that it's only extending affordability for rental units. That was what I intended to be here.
okay, great. And my last point is, the other main thing in terms of funding that happened this last year, of course, was the state budget reducing or attempting to raid the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is the main funding source that a lot of us nonprofits use to create affordable housing units. So, Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey has been advocating a lot to restore that funding. So that would be another key area to focus on.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mike. That's a good flag. And I think is also just another one of the cross-cutting issues probably is the raids on all of the funds, right? Like we consistently see raids. Obviously the trust fund is a big one. But the raids on the transportation trust fund, the clean energy fund, the opioid settlement funds, right? Like everything was rated this year. And so I think as another sort of cross-cutting issue. Ira, go ahead.
Thank you. A couple questions, and I'm talking from a complete point of ignorance. This is all new to me. I'm sitting on this discussion as a member of the board of the Nonprofit Development Center. Mike brought up an interesting point about all the letters. Is there a comprehensive list of all the different support funding for affordable housing? Is my first question. Something that everybody could go look at and say, oh, well, this fits my client or this fits another
So,
client.
yeah. So I think you're talking, there's like two things. I think your question is potential are sources of funding, which
You're breaking
exist
up.
on the, sorry, can you hear me now?
That's
So there
better.
are
Thank you.
sources of funding to build affordable housing, which exist on the federal, state, and local levels, right? Where people can access funding to build like brick and mortar affordable housing. So Mike mentioned some of those. And then there are rental subsidies that support people through, as Maria was talking about, SRAP vouchers. There are federal vouchers also. So SRAP are the state vouchers. There are also federal vouchers. Is there a list of all of those somewhere? Somebody else on this call probably knows better than I do. I think it is one of the challenges is how does the general public know where to find vouchers so you can apply to the state to get on the list, which I think opens once a year. But again, I know Angela has her hand up to go next. So like Angela is a good person who might know the answer to this question. But it's sort of difficult because the vouchers get disseminated in different ways. And so while you can get them directly from you can also get them for a variety of other agencies, both state agencies and nonprofit agencies. So it's not an easy space to navigate.
Would that be beneficial to the agencies and the individuals if such a list existed?
I'll let service provider, Angela, I don't know if you want to jump in, like service providers who are in that space to answer that.
No, good morning, everyone. Hey, thanks, Alex. I was taking the pitch as you was pushing it. In regards to that, with Section 8 or housing choice vouchers or the state's housing choice voucher or Section 8 wait list, as we know, like she said, it comes up once a year and then it's based off of a lottery. We already know from data and statistics, there's never generally enough vouchers to supply for what the need is. In addition to the state, some local jurisdictions have local housing authorities where they open up their wait list. But again, it's never always going to be enough vouchers that's going to supply for what the need. I wanted to tap in regards to that affordable housing, especially the development of affordable housing. And I love how the list has streamlined the process to make it easier to acquire a vacant property. Oftentimes, in communities, we'll see where a shameless, or I should say nameless LLC will come and acquire property and they'll develop or renovate that vacant property and not really make it affordable for what the community needs. They're nowhere near in the community. They're probably, I don't know, in a different state and could care less. So I love how you put that, streamline the process to make it easier to acquire vacant property, but then also tying into that Section 8 or a housing subsidy. When developers are developing apartment complexes in most areas, we often see that there's a set aside and there's only 5 units that are applicable for someone with low income. I think that is not necessarily where we need to go all the time. I understand the importance of a mixed use development of affordable housing, where, i.e., it could be for low income, it could be for the extremely low income, and then it can also be for those who are actually making enough to pay a market rate rental rate, or at least getting them up to going there. But oftentimes we do not see that. In most communities, you're seeing when a developer comes up and they'll develop properties, and you know, those that are in need couldn't even qualify because they make the criteria and eligibility so far from what the need is. And it's kind of hard to get a person to home ownership
Yeah,
if they
thanks
can't
for
get
raising
there.
that, Angela. I think, yeah, thanks for raising that, Angela. I think, you know, what you're talking about is inclusionary zoning and requiring certain percentages of new developments to have set asides for affordable units. So South Jersey is unique. I think this is another difference between North Jersey and South Jersey, where major cities in North Jersey do have inclusionary zoning ordinances that do require new developments. So Jersey City, Hoboken, Newark all have inclusionary zoning, where in South Jersey, Atlantic City, Camden, don't have inclusionary zoning ordinances. And so you can see the gentrification happening, right? Where communities that have lived in places for generations are being pushed out because market rate housing is coming in. So that's a good flag, Angela. Thanks. Ira, did you have another? I think you might have said you had two questions.
Yeah, but what I didn't hear was, granted these vouchers come out, but what I didn't hear was, would it be beneficial to have a comprehensive list of all the possible vouchers and programs that are available?
Now, to your point, Era, yes, it would be beneficial because oftentimes we're not even aware of when the list opens, and then when the list does open, who has affordable units. So tailoring a comprehensive list where it's going to allow when the time frame opens, how
Okay, I'm not
many,
asking
as well
lists
as
of properties. I'm asking of
vouchers.
a list of vouchers that can be applied for.
You're asking, would it be beneficial to have a comprehensive list stating, okay, so the Department of Community Affairs opens up their wait list and say we have 45 vouchers for this area.
Right, and all the other agencies, the alphabet soup that Mike had mentioned earlier.
Yes. I think that that would be beneficial because the concept of it is the golden rule is no one knows who has what. And when you don't, when people, we call it the gatekeeping of the resources, it's really hard for those who need it to know when it's available. By the time they are aware that it's available or how many, it's no, it's extinct. There's no more vouchers available. So I think that mandating a comprehensive list as well as location would be very much so beneficial because everyone always says, how do you find the resources before they're expired?
And that's the point I was trying to get to. Go ahead.
One of the things that we do at Legal Services is each of our local offices, we know like who our local housing authorities are, because as Angela was saying, Section 8 vouchers are different than SRAB vouchers. They come from all different sources. So you might have a local housing authority that they open their waiting list and they'll give out vouchers. So we just in-house keep our own like watch on what housing authorities will open their list, because I do want to correct one piece of misinformation. The lists don't open every year. The lists only open when they have available vouchers. So like the DCA list, um, I've seen it as long as 7 years before the list opened.
Really?
Yeah. Now, some local housing authorities that have vouchers, their lists may open sooner than that, but it's not a yearly thing because local housing authorities are governed by local law, so they govern their vouchers. They have to use HUD rules, but they are issued vouchers in a different way. And they all have different waiting lists, and it depends on when they open the list for you to get on the list and how fast they move people through the waiting list to then open it up for applications again. It's not a process where someone just goes and makes an application and like a year later they might come up with a voucher. It's a years long process. So to your point, yeah, it might be helpful to have such a list, and maybe your agency could compile something like that, because it would be very complex to do that, to put all of that together. Like literally it's taken me like 27 years to learn all of this stuff.
So Maria,
Mhm.
is there an analog in how employment is handled? So we have all of the county workforce development boards, and they almost all, I believe, 17 of the 21 counties have one stops where if you're looking for a job, you can walk
Yeah.
in the door and somebody there can say, not only these are the jobs that if you need training to achieve a certain level of literacy, we can get you all those kinds of things. But the idea of I mean, I keep thinking of who are we doing this for? We're doing this for there are 2.5 million people who live in South Jersey who are potential recipients of services from the 23,000 not-for-profits that exist in South Jersey. If I don't know that somebody exists and has resources or can help me, I'm certainly not going to go to them. So how do we create a system that at least gets people to say, I can go to, I'll call it a portal. And if I need after school reading assistance for my middle schooler, we don't have that here, but we have it the next community over, or we don't have it at all and somebody ought to start it. I don't know that I've explained that very well, but it just keeps coming back to me that we have to look at this from the point of view of you all exist because you can supply specific technical information to people who otherwise would be clueless with respect to the negative and positive forces that they see in the marketplace. And I'm trying to think of what we could do, what NPDCSNJ could do to help people get to you and get to the other sources of help that are out there. If I don't know there's help available, I'm screwed. If there's help available, but it doesn't apply to me, then somebody such as some organizations such as ours could say, we have to find a way to fill in that gap, but I don't even know what the gaps are.
Well, I would say
Michael,
United Way used to put out a book of like all agencies that would help. Maybe
Yeah,
like,
so I was just gonna say, so there are like different, I can't think of what the name of it is right now. And I don't think it covers all of South Jersey, but the Camden Coalition used to run it.
My
Somebody
resource
else,
pal.
my resource pal. Yeah. And so there are like different, I think, attempts to do that, right? To sort of create a network of providers and what are they doing? I think the challenge with the vouchers is, I think to Maria and Angela's point, like they're coming from all over. It's unclear like who has them, who has an open voucher. There are federal vouchers and a continuum of care system, right? That is different than state vouchers. So there's a lot of overlap. Right? You have federal, state, and local vouchers. And so it's figuring out the best way to do that. I know that there are, I think that this is an issue potentially, right? Like also to think about, we have an incoming administration, right? Like maybe there's a recommendation somewhere there that like the state should provide, right? Like some more coordination across all of these levels. But it is certainly complicating. But I know we're at time, and so just want to be respectful of people's time. Thank you all for attending and for the conversation today. I will follow up with sort of all of the meeting summaries, all of the information, and as I mentioned earlier, like a Google form survey to solicit more input on the variety of solutions that have been raised, and also give you all an opportunity to potentially add some other solutions. And then we'll be in touch with the final report and an invitation for the summit in March. And then also just wanted to quickly plug that Rutgers is hosting a housing justice summit in October. And so I can also send that out to folks via email as well. But thank you again, everybody, for coming today.
And thank you, Alex, for all the perspective, all the hard work, all the subject matter expertise that you've provided. You've been extraordinary in terms of how you've helped us get through this discussion, even though Ira and I still don't know what all those, initials stand for, but we'll get up to speed at some point. I encourage all of you to, if you have thoughts as you get the survey from Alex, or thoughts at any point, or there are people that you think should be part of this discussion, but for some reason haven't or don't know about it, to encourage them. It's not a process that ends when we have a report. It's a process that continues. And if there are ideas that we haven't identified, if there are problems we haven't identified, we need to do that. If they're doing something in Dubuque, Iowa that, we should steal and do here, I want to know about that. So again, Alex, thanks so much. And our apologies for the delay in getting this started. We went from one system of Zoom calling to another, and we're getting some kinks out, but you all were very patient. We appreciate that. I think that'll do it, unless somebody has an important point you want to make before we close the meeting. All right, I don't see a hand raised. So Alex, thank you again. Thank you all
Yep,
for
thanks
joining us.
everyone.
Thank you.